Rabbi Simon Altaf, your host today on our chosen people of Yehuda, the creator of this earth. Who are they? We're on part 8, I believe. I've been away for a number of weeks, probably a few months, because of various engagements. But I have been here, and many of you asked to do more recordings of teachings. As you're aware that we do teachings on other forums as well, like Pal Talk, where you can join us on the Shabbat day, that's like today, 5:30 p.m. Eastern US time. There is a room that we have over there called Yeshua, the real Yehoshua, and Torah. It is under the Africa section and other. That's in Pal Talk. We also conduct Sabbath services in London. For those of you who are in England and wish to join us, we conduct fortnightly Sabbath services in near Victoria Station. So for those details, there is an email address at the end of this program that will be given that you can look at and write, and a telephone number that you can use to connect with me if you need to. I do talk to people all over the world, as it may not be apparent to some of you. I was speaking to a couple of brothers in South Africa and Tanzania just a couple of nights ago, discussing about the true faith and discussing about present world today, and how is it that we receive the contract agreements from our Elohim, and how is it that we fulfill those. Now, one of the questions that is often asked is this, that if the Hebrews were black Negro people, now notice this, that there were black people, there were Negro people, but there was a mixture throughout our people of black-skinned people, light-skinned, brown, and there were even some Caucasian-skinned people amongst us. So coming to the point is, then they ask the question, if the Negroes were the Hebrew, or let's just say black people were Hebrews, then two questions are asked. Who is, for instance, in Israel today? Because as you know, in Israel today, majority of the folks are Ashkenazim, and then we have the Sephardim, then we also have the Middle Eastern Jews. Now, Ashkenazim, I'm going to go into that a little later, and Sephardim, what the actual words mean. Then the other assertion by a lot of the Hebrew Israelites out there is this, that all the white people are Edom and they are of the devil. Now, is that accurate to make that kind of statement? We will look at that. One of the things that I want to point out is that for your information and knowledge is this, that Edom, like Jacob, which will probably be another segment of my discussion and another program, is that Edom was not Caucasian to start with. He was a black man, okay? So if you're going to make all white people seed of the devil, for argument's sake, that just wouldn't hold true, just on that basis. So we need to separate fact from fiction and find out who are today's Edomites. Okay, so the people in Israel will look at that point as well. This is the purpose of today's program, is to clarify those points. And isn't it also true that the modern Jewry, that is the Ashkenazim, have originated from Caucasus Mountains? Where are the Caucasus Mountains? Well, most of you who understand history, or at least some of you, I doubt many of you understand history, you need to obviously go and do some research on that. Caucasus Mountains are not far off from Iran and Russia, and I would say probably more closer to Russia, and there was a huge kingdom in there at one time, which the Russians even don't like to admit. That was called the Khazarian kingdom, and a lot of the Ashkenaz today who have come in to call themselves Jews are converts from that kingdom, and they are the people who inhabited after the kingdom was broken apart by Muslims, by the way, because they held back Islamic forces to cross over to the Russian region. This is why you don't find that a lot of those people ended up becoming Muslims. So either they became Christians, kind of pseudo-Christian, like the Catholic variety, the what they call the traditional Christian, or they became that kingdom at that particular time, obviously being Khazaria, they became convert Jews. Okay, so when that kingdom was broken by Islamic forces, and that was during the 8th century, 9th century AD, that's or CE, that's this side of our centuries, not the BCE era. And it was that time that they came into Europe, and they inhabited large portions of Europe. Countries like Germany, countries like, for instance, Hungary, and all these kind of countries. Poland was inhabited by them. This is why today you have the Polish Jew, the Hungarian Jew, even the Hungarian Jews or the Khazarians, they influenced the language of Hungary as well. Part of the Hebrew script ended up in the Hungary language. So this is a kind of thing. Now we also need to identify the Edomites, for instance. So if, for instance, those people are from the Ashkenazim, who is Ashkenaz? So I will take you to the map that I've drawn quickly for you in a hurry. This is Japheth, one of the sons of Noah. Then we have Shem, one of the sons of Noah. Then we have Ham, another son of Noah. So we have the three sons of Noah. That is their daddy. That's who they descended from. Let's make that clear. Now, what happened then, below that we have sons. I've only mentioned part sons. I haven't mentioned all of them because my purpose is to illustrate the point. One of the sons of Japheth was Ashkenaz. All the Europeans, Caucasians today, have descended from Ashkenaz. So all the white Caucasian Jewry out there, doesn't matter what they call themselves, Jews, non-Jews, whatever, those people are the sons of Ashkenaz. And so they are Europeans, they are not Semitic people. They may charge in Israel today with the Arab people being anti-Semitic, but actually this is kind of a ludicrous kind of charge, because Arabs are Semitic whilst the Caucasian Jewry isn't Semitic. Then we have the Togarma, who was also one of the sons of Japheth, and Togarma are the Turkic people. Notice today's modern Turkic people are of also Caucasoid skin color. They are not black skin, okay? So this is how we have this mixing. And if you think that I am just making these things up, I want you to go and type some of the names of the Zionist people who established Israel in 1948, and those people who became prime ministers and so forth at that particular time. Golda Meir and some of the other people who were there, I want you to go and check where they got educated from. Those people were of Togarma, house of Togarma. They were Turkic, pure and simple. Ashkenaz, that means from Japheth, if they were from Togarma, if they were Turkic, and that's where they came from, that's where they educated, therefore those people are Gentile converts into what our faith really was. Now coming back to Shem, now I'm going to mention two of the descendants of Shem. One is Esau, one is Jacob. If Esau was a Caucasoid, if he was of white skin color, then Esau, rightly so, then you could point out that somehow there was a crossing over here to here, but unfortunately it doesn't quite work like that. I will explain how the crossing happened. Esau was a black man, because if we look at Shem, and if we look at the ancestor below Shem, like Yitzhak, Isaac, if Isaac was black or a man of color, then both of his sons were also men of color. That goes for Esau, that goes for Yaqub, Jacob. Okay, we will look at Jacob another time. Well, I will explain how we can determine that he was definitely of black skin color. So was Esau. Now one of the things that is mentioned in there actually helps us, and this is how a lot of people get lost in tracking Jacob, but I will help you do that. Okay, so Ham is, or Cham basically means hot. In the Hebrew, in the ancient Hebrew, it means black. Okay, it means hot, like black, like an oven. So if Cham is black, then Cham's children were black. Mitzrayim, Egypt. Mitzrayim is the ancient name. Egypt is the modern name, or Mitzar. We have Cush. Cush is again the ancient name. Today, modern name is Ethiopia, but actually that's not entirely correct, because Cush is not just Ethiopia. Cush covers a very large, broad region in that particular hemisphere, and part of that region is also what I call Southeastern Arabia, Sudan, and some other nations that encompass that particular area today. Now, I want to point out that John Hyrcanus, who was a son of Matthew Maccabee. Now remember, we are coming close to something called Hanukkah, not far away from now, 21st of December. John Hyrcanus, he was a son of Matthew Maccabee, and Maccabee is the one who drove the Greeks out. Who are the Greeks? The Greeks are these people, Turkic, Togarma, house of Togarma, okay? So when he drove those people out, he helped destroy the temple, and some of you may not even have heard of this. he helped destroy the temple that was at Mount Gerizim, that was built by the Samaritans, okay? That was near Mount Gerizim, a city called at that time Shechem. If any of you have correct understanding of our father Abraham, a man of color, then Abraham dwelled at Shechem at one time, okay? So we can understand why this particular temple was built there, which John Hyrcanus, Yochanan Hyrcanus, actually destroyed completely. And we can read about that. I will give you a reference, Antiquities, and this is War of the Jews. This is Josephus Flavius, the historian. He mentions Antiquities 13:257. I will have it written on the screen so you don't miss it. Antiquities 13:39. Josephus also tells us that when the south of that Hyrcanus, John Hyrcanus, went into the south of Israel in Elat, what is today known as Elat, and also the Idumean regions. What are the Idumean regions? They are the regions directly below Israel that run partly into Jordan and also into northern Arabia. He went into those regions and he actually forcefully converted all the Idumeans. Now these Idumeans were the Edomites, okay? These were these people, sons of Esau. He converted them forcefully into Judaism. That is how you set up Judaism to become what it is today. So when people talk about Islamic, for instance, conversions, forced conversions today, Islam learned these forceful conversions from our forefathers. Okay, so be careful about, when you label somebody as forcefully converting people, including Christians, that they did the same thing. You can call it Catholics, you can call it Christians. It doesn't matter to me what label you want to give them. Christians, they believe in Jesus Christ. Either way, whether it's Catholics or it's non-Catholics, doesn't matter. So they both inherited traditions of each other, or I should say Christianity is a daughter of Catholicism. So having said that, so forced conversions were derived from our forefathers. Well, I think that was a mistake personally, but anyway, that's my personal opinion. But having said that, that was to happen prophetically speaking, because that is what set up Israel to be what it is today. This is how these people, the Ashkenazim, were able to cross over. This is how you have your prime ministers of Israel, your early prime minister of Israel, and the other people that were there. These are those people. That's how Esau managed to overcross into what I term Judaism. And we have this relationship between Esau and between the Togarma, Turkic Caucasoid people. Caucasoid people meaning people of white skin color. Now we must be careful that within those people we can't lump all the Europeans within that skin color, like the British, the Italians, the French. However, I want to say something about the Italians. There are part and parcel Italians mixed in there as well. That is these people, Ashkenaz. So Ashkenaz also partly cross over to Esau. How do they cross over? Because I will explain that Herod, or Herod the Great, one of the people who was an Edomite hybrid convert to Judaism. Now obviously his family had been forcefully converted. He had then realized, the Edomites realized, that they could acquire power by controlling the temple. If they control the temple in Jerusalem, they will have the power to control all of the people of Israel. That's what they did. They controlled the temple. Okay, this is how he ended up marrying into the Roman side, the Italians. So Italians ended up in the mix. That's today's modern Italians, the Europeans. They ended up in the mix of Esau and Togarma. Therefore, does it include the British? Because British also had Rome. The answer is, generally speaking, no. Most of the British people are not included in that mix. Or most of the, for argument's sake, if we take other countries like Polish, take Hungarians, etc., you'll find very little mixing of those people in today's modern Jewry. So modern Jewry today has completely developed from some from Ashkenaz, some from Togarma. What happened when they mixed? You produce mixed children, and over a period of time, which we know was hundreds and thousands of years, what happens is the children turn out completely Caucasoid. The color has completely been lost. So the way to understand it is, if you marry a Caucasian woman today, if you're a black man or if you're a brown skin color, you're likely to have children which are going to be what I call mixed, but if the next generation of that mixed children, they won't even know that they come from a black origin, because they'll be totally looking like Europeans. So we can understand, and this is how the modern day Jews were able to inhabit Israel by converting into our faith, technically those people are Gentiles. But because they came into Israel, because they accepted the religious and the beliefs of Israelites who were people of color, therefore they call themselves Hebrews today. However, there's a demarcation, there's some things that we can say over here, some things we can't say. What we can't say is that whether all those people are evil, but we can say is that Zionism in itself is an evil ideology, political evil ideology. We do not adhere or we do not stick to any kind of Zionist ideology. A lot of the Zionists are secularists, but there are also religious Zionists. I don't want to say any further than that about religious Zionists. If they are Torah abiding, if they believe in the Torah and they serve the Most High, then their relationship will dictate what happens to them. Okay, so we move on, and as I showed you the different people that came about as a result of that. Now I want to also point out is that there were marriages. Now there were marriages because there's only 3 sons. Okay. Now, most of you are not familiar with these terms because you haven't had the Eastern background. There were marriages between what we call cousin marriages or half brothers, half sisters. These are perfectly legible. They are allowed according to halakha and Torah as well. There were marriages between the sons and daughters of Shem, Ham, and Japheth. One of the interesting points I want to make, which you can read in the Abrahamic Faith Netzarim Study, Hebrew Study Scriptures, which you have to purchase from the Abrahamic Faith website, is that one of Japheth's daughters was the wife of Abraham. Did you know that? She was. So you can look up that information in the Abrahamic Faith Netzarim Hebraic Study Scriptures. The reference to that will be on the website at the end of this show. Also, I want to point out that if you understand who Yehoshua is, he was also cut. There's a book called The Black Yehoshua. If you want to understand his genealogies, there's a book called Beit Yehoshua, the son of Zadok, son of Daud, etc., etc. There's lots of material to help you into developing a correct understanding of historical basis of what you are and what we were in the past, etc. One of the things I want to point out is this nonsensical argument that all the, for instance, people in Haishi are Levites. The answer is they're not. Okay, so a lot of this kind of bad theology is perpetrated on the internet, and a lot of those people are not Levites. Levites were actually mixed into many nations when they left Israel, and if there were Levites anywhere that we are recorded in history is Iran and Iraq. These are the 2 places where the Levites ended up in, apart from other nations as well. We know that there are the Lemba in Zimbabwe. They are also, some of them are also of the Levite clan. So Levites were kind of mixed into those people. But what the Haitian people could be is that there is a majority in there who are of the 10 tribes, but not necessarily Levites. So don't make all of yourselves as Levites. Okay, so there is a mixture. So we need to understand that. And one of the other false theologies that's going around in Hebrew Israelite camp is that, oh well, if you were not a slave, you can't be a Hebrew Israelite. Well, whoever gave you that example obviously doesn't know anything about history or anything about what happened to our people. One of the things I want to point out is that you will not hear this from anywhere else apart from me, is that Levites were not slaves, never were slaves. Okay, Levites did not accept the ruling of the Pharaoh in Egypt, even at the time when the children of Israel, when our ancestors became slaves, we were not slaves. So I'm of the house of Levi. We never became slaves because we never accepted what the Pharaoh offered. We refused to work. And we were allotted land where we were living. And this is how you can read in the Torah, and you can see for yourself that Aharon, when he went to meet Moses, he moved freely to meet Moses. He didn't have to ask his boss, can I take a day off please and go and see him? How did Aaron move about freely? Because Aaron and Aaron's sons were not slaves. Okay, the house of Aaron, that's where I belong to, we were not slaves. We never were slaves. However, when Israel was broken, when Israel was taken into captivity during the first, second and third break by Nebuchadnezzar, and then later by the Romans, our people ended up as slaves temporarily, but as soon as they crossed over to the other side, they were given freedom, they were given facilities, and we were actually still teachers at that time. So we want to continue. One of the points I want to make about the Caucasoid people is this, that according to the historian Herodotus, the history of the Colchians, a people called Russian, Chechens and Slavs, were originally from the dark races of people, okay, in Africa, inhabiting those regions in 2000 BCE, when it was ruled by Africans. So who are these Colchians? Who are these people? See, remember, so for that, to understand that particular point, remember what I said earlier. Japheth, Shem, Ham, 3 sons. There was a mixing because the sons and daughters of these 3 people intermarried. This is why all 3 of these boys, they were called Africans, because Israel as a nation is in northeast Africa. That is one of the things that most of you don't understand. Israel is not in Middle East. Middle East is a term coined by the British in 1928. That happened when King Abdul Aziz, when he conquered Arabia, when he defeated Al-Rashid in for instance, in what's termed Hijaz, which is the area of southeastern Arabia. At that particular point, an area, for instance, that he covered, he wiped the whole clan of Al-Rashid in the Najd, and when he did that, and then afterwards he declared his kingship in 1927, and in 1928, because the British wanted to formulate an alliance, and they wanted to go over there, and they had certain lands they had in their possession, such as Israel. So at that particular point in history, they coined the term Middle East. It was the British people that actually went and formulated what is Arabia, what is Syria, what is Iran, etc., etc. They actually drew the lines, okay? So most of you have completely no knowledge of these things, and you make up assumptions that Israel is in the Middle East. Israel is actually a northeast African country. Maybe another time I will explain that in more detail. So we've looked at the 3 sons of Noah, that they were called Africans. Why were they called Africans? Because Noah, who is their daddy, his ark landed in Africa. Okay, his ark did not land in what is purported to be Turkey or Iran or anywhere else for that matter, apart from Africa. Now, one of the things you can quickly validate, and this is explained in the AFN Study Bible as well, is that how do we determine today if what I'm saying is true or not? It's very easy, very easy. Check for yourselves in the whole world, where is the largest population of animals? Is it in Turkey? Is it in Iran? Or is it in Africa? Do the British from here or the Americans go for their safaris to Africa, or do they go for their safaris in Turkey? If they go for their safaris in Africa, then you will know that that is where our ancestors are. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm probably going to continue. I was going to take a break, I'm going to continue. So coming back to that, one of the things that the books of Enoch, the 3 books of Enoch that we also actually have translated and can be obtained through the Abrahamic-faith.info website, can be looked at, and they give us some of the very good information, and behind the commentaries is a commentary that I did myself, that you will see that some of the things I've told you today will be actually found in the books of Enoch, which are canonical, by the way. So the question then comes is how do we hide the true identity of the people and to keep them in shackle? I think maybe I will do that in the next segment of the program, how we lost our identity, how our people became in shackles, and what happened and what not, etc., because otherwise we're going to run out of time here. However, I want to point out this particular fact that this particular fella, that is Jesus of the Christians, the Caucasoid Jesus, he is not our Messiah as such. Maybe you could say they are teaching it in ignorance, in which case we need to understand it slightly, that they are teaching that he's abrogated the law. No, he hasn't abrogated the law. Our real Messiah, Yahushua, who many of you commonly call Yeshua, which is the Aramaic form of his name, was a man of non-Caucasoid skin. He was a man of black skin color. He was a man who taught Torah, and he was a man who commanded us to keep and obey the Torah. So therefore we need to understand that this Christian fella, Jesus, is not really our Messiah as such, because he teaches completely contrary, or I would say if not him, at least his so-called ministers teach completely contrary to the renewed contract agreement that Yud-He-Vav have gave us. Okay, so in other words, you can take it as ignorance from the Christian camp, but our real Messiah, Yahushua of Nazareth, was a person of color.
So in your eyes, this land, the Holy Land, what they call Israel, Palestine, this is Africa.
This is Africa.
We've done a great job in being able to demonstrate that this is Northeast Africa. And once we begin to look at it as such, and we stop believing this idea of Israel being a part of the Middle East.
Go over here, and I'm going to show you where Israel sits on the African tectonic plate, which means that Israel is Northeast Africa.
What do you mean Middle East? Is there an Upper East, a Lower East? What do you mean Middle East?
For most of the blacks, they have a confusion about Israel. This is your home. This is your land.
But you know, the government, before the Turkish people come here, they control this land for 400 years, and they left, and we stay in the desert. Then the English, the government of English people, they come here, maybe control some of a little time, and they left, and we stay here, and now it's the Israeli, and we stay here, and we could continue to stay in this land.
He's from Africa. Esther Dorot, 10 generations here.
The black people here in this land, it's not for the last 100 years or something like this. It's more than 1,000 of years.
We are deeply rooted in this country. We are talking about generations and generations.
The evidence is hands down. It's not even something that we engage in a debate on about the dark-skinned nature of the peoples that lived in these regions in antiquity.
They're not original here. They know that we are the original people here.
The reality is that we tend to look at this land based on what we've seen in contemporary times. And what do we see? We see fair-skinned Israelis, and we see fair-skinned Arabs.
הייתה פלסטין, הייתה לפני הטורקים, before the Palestinian, before the Turkish Empire.
I have a book called The Arabs. I believe the author's name was Bertrand Thomas. On page 339, he says the original inhabitants of Arabia were not the more familiar Arabs of our own time, but a very much darker people.
You see this people in the mosque? I say, you see this people in the mosque? He don't want the black in the mosque to become the imam, the first man who did this. Then he start to say Hassan al-Basri this, his education from the black people. So don't say. They say what? I say yeah. You have to become to become the leader. He say Hassan al-Basri. You have to stand the imam and don't say Hassan al-Basri. He say my cousin Hassan al-Basri, my brother Hassan al-Basri.
You can say we began when the Islam came to Palestine, but I'm quite sure we are even before and before and before.
You look at the name of Palestine, it was the name that the Romans gave to the land formerly known as Judea.
Another thing about America is that at the Last Supper, if you remember, Yeshua and the disciples were sitting around the table, and they had glassware on the table. They were not drinking out of glass.
I just watched the TV one time. I see a movie through the TV. I see this is Zayd al-Halal. I see they put it in the TV, he's white. But everybody know, even the white, they know this is Zayd al-Halali, he's a black.
If you take the map of the old city, you never find the African quarter. You will find Christian quarter, Armenian, Jewish, Muslim quarter, but never the African quarter.
National TV about Palestinian suffering. You ever see a black brother?
No.
But we suffer the same.
People from our people. They regard Jesus to be black, Moses, Muhammad, Abraham.
The geographical borders of the biblical land of Israel are laid down in 3 places in the Hebrew Bible: in Genesis, Exodus, and Numbers. These 3 books contain a relatively detailed description of the region in Africa where the Israelite culture and civilization was centered. The references found in these books are many times obscure and ambiguous, and difficult to discern because of the absolute nature of the place names that are used as reference. But they still have preserved for us a rough picture of the borders of the region known in the Bible as the land of Israel. The first map is found in Genesis 15. In the passage where God describes to Abraham the area that would forever be inherited and occupied by his descendants.
In the same day the Lord made a covenant with Abram, saying, Unto thy seed have I given this land, from the river of Egypt unto the great river, the river Euphrates, the Kenites, and the Kenizzites, and the Cadmonites, and the Hittites, and the Perizzites, and the Rephaims, and the Amorites, and the Canaanites, and the Girgashites, and the Jebusites.
The area described in this passage includes a very large and vast region in East and Northeast Africa. It begins with the river of Egypt, which, as we will soon see, stretch as far north as the edges of the first cataract in the city of Aswan. The borders then continue south towards the Euphrates River in Ethiopia. Yes, the biblical Euphrates River, which is a separate topic in itself, a topic which we will cover in a separate episode, was not located in Iraq, but actually in Ethiopia. But until then, all that we need to remember is that the biblical Euphrates River is not the river that it has been associated with for the past 2,000 years, but another river that was located in Ethiopia. The Genesis borders begin in the city of Aswan, the most southern borders of ancient Egypt, and they continue all the way down to Ethiopia. These borders are further elaborated by the next map. This map is complementary to the first map in Genesis. Unlike the Genesis map, this map begins the borders of Israel from the Nile River in Ethiopia, or the Yam Suf, and then stretches northwards towards Egypt. This is opposite to the map in Genesis 15, which began in Egypt and stretched down towards Ethiopia. The reason for this is that at this particular instance in the Exodus saga, the Hebrews have already left Egypt and are standing at Mount Sinai, and this map reflects this historical reality. It begins the borders from where the Hebrews were standing at the time, next to Yam Suf in Ethiopia, and then stretches northwards in the opposite direction towards Egypt. From the Yam Suf in Ethiopia to the Sea of the Philistines would translate in modern language to from the southern parts of the Nile, most likely the Atbara Tekese joining point, and then upwards towards the river of the Philistines. The question then is, what is the Sea of Philistines? The Bible describes the Philistines as the descendants of Mizraim, the ancestor of the Egyptians.
And Mizraim begat Ludim, and Anamim, and Lehabim, and Naphtuhim, and Pathrozim, and Casluhim, out of whom came Philistim, and Caphtorim.
They are also described as being either the ancestors or the inhabitants of a region or a people that's known in the Bible as Caphtor.
Are ye not as children of the Ethiopians unto me, O children of Israel, saith the Lord? Have not I brought up Israel out of the land of Egypt, and the Philistines from Caphtor, and the Syrians from Kir, because of the day that cometh to spoil all the Philistines, and to cut off from Tyrus and Zidon every helper that remaineth? For the Lord will spoil the Philistines, the remnant of the country of Caphtor.
The Bible doesn't explicitly state where the Caphtorites lived, but it is very explicit in its association of the Philistines with the people or region of Caphtor. Archaeology hasn't been able to establish any specific region for the biblical Caphtorites, and there are still questions about where this nation lived. The most specific archaeological identification of the biblical Caphtorites comes from an inscription that contains the letters K, P, T, E, and R. This inscription has been found in the temple of Kom Ombo in the city of Aswan, the most southern parts of ancient Egypt. This is the strongest identification of the Caphtorites so far, and it places the Caphtorites in southern Egypt. The Bible also seems to confirm the southern position of the biblical Philistines and Caphtorites, who are described as living on the southwestern quarters of ancient Egypt. Even though the Philistines are described as being very closely related to the Egyptians, they are also identified as a separate nation from the Egyptians, who had a separate culture outside the borders of ancient Egypt. They are described as having existed and having been powerful even in the days of Abraham, roughly 1400 or 1500 BC, and to have continued as a powerful political and military opponent of both Israel and neighboring nations, all the way until the time of King David, roughly 9th century BC. The biblical Philistines were the Kadma culture south of Egypt. We will discuss this nation in details in a following episode. The Philistines were situated southwest of Egypt, precisely in front of Edom and Moab, which previous episodes showed that they lived in the southeastern Nile coast of Sudan.
But they shall fly upon the shoulders of the Philistines toward the west. They shall spoil them of the east together. They shall lay their hand upon Edom and Moab, and the children of Ammon shall obey them.
2 Chronicles describes the Philistines as being neighbors of Cush, ancient Nubia.
Moreover the Lord stirred up against Jehoram the spirit of the Philistines and of the Arabians that were near the Ethiopians.
2 Chronicles is sufficient to completely discredit the claim of the biblical Philistines having lived in modern-day Palestine. We will discuss this topic more in depth in a following episode. The Philistines' southwestern location explains why the book of Exodus tells us that the Hebrews were not allowed to go through the Egyptian desert and straight south through the Saharan desert on the exodus out of Egypt, but instead had to cross the Nile eastwards and then go south.
And it came to pass, when Pharaoh had let the people go, that God led them not through the way of the land of the Philistines, although that was near, for God said, Lest peradventure the people repent when they see war, and they return to Egypt.
Straight south along the Nile, and through the Saharan desert, would be crossing into the borders of the Philistines, who seem to have had their capital on the western side of the Nile at the time of the Exodus. The river that was recognized by the Hebrews as the Sea of Philistines was the second cataract of the Nile. This is confirmed in 1 Kings, which separates the river of Egypt, i.e. the first cataract of the Nile, from the river of the Philistines, the second cataract.
And Solomon reigned over all kingdoms from the river unto the land of the Philistines, and unto the border of Egypt. They brought presents, and served Solomon all the days of his life.
An interesting yet obscure confirmation can also be found in 2 Kings, which describes the Philistines as living as far north as Migdol, the fortress city.
He smote the Philistines even unto Gaza, and the borders thereof, from the tower of the watchman to the fenced city.
Migdol, as explained in the video, the real Exodus route to Ethiopia, refers to the Abu Simbel towers of the first cataract in the city of Aswan, or as they are called in this verse, the Tower of the Watchman, meaning the watchmen on the Abu Simbel towers of southern Egypt, the towers that were erected by Ramses to demonstrate to Nubia the power of Egypt, and thus guard and protect the country from a potential Nubian invasion. Another interesting detail is that the word Kaftor actually means crown. Could this be a reference to the city of Aswan, which was located the furthest north of Egypt? Could the crown of Egypt, meaning the furthest north on the reverted ancient Egyptian map, be biblical Kaftor, the geographical crown on ancient Egyptian territory? The Reed Sea to the Sea of the Philistines would mean from the Nile coasts of Sudan and Ethiopia to the Second Cataract in Sudan, and from the Saharan Desert in the north all the way to the great river, the Euphrates. The most detailed map on the land of Israel is found in the book of Numbers. Although this is the most detailed map in the Bible, it is also the most difficult map to discern because of the obsolete references that are used in this map. Unlike the two previous maps, which made a linear trace of ancient Israelite territory, the map in the book of Numbers divides the land of Israel into 4 regions: north, south, west, and east. The map begins with the Negev borders, the desert borders north of the Holy Land. It first draws the line westward towards the Nile River, towards the land of Edom. This is the furthest west on the Negev borders. It then goes the opposite direction towards the Salt Sea in the Danakil Desert, and this is the eastern edges of the Negev borders. After demarcating the western and eastern edges of the southern borders of the Negev, the map then turns northwards towards Egypt. It first goes north towards the region known as Akrabim. Akrabim means scorpions and refers to the part of the Saharan Desert that the Hebrews were migrating through during the Exodus when they were attacked by scorpions. This is somewhere in the southeastern parts of the Saharan Desert.
Who led thee through that great and terrible wilderness, wherein were fiery serpents and scorpions and drought, where there was no water, who brought thee forth water out of the rock of flint.
The borders then continue northward towards a city located in Egypt and is called Atzmon. Atzmon is described as being located in the river of Egypt itself, the river that we already explained as being the first cataract. Atzmon, a clear Hebrew corruption of the name Aswan, refers to the southern edges of ancient Egypt. This was the furthest north on the biblical map. After hitting this point, the borders then turn eastwards and go out at the sea, meaning the Red Sea. These were the northern borders of the land of Israel, the region inhabited by the largest tribe of Israel, the tribe of Judah, which inhabited this huge region in East Africa, and also parts of northern Ethiopia, with their capital being Jerusalem, a city located in northern Ethiopia. The map continues with the second region, the Yam region.
And as for the western border, ye shall even have the great sea for a border. This shall be your west border.
The sea here refers to the Nile River, which represented the most western parts of the land of Israel. Further west of the Nile was considered foreign territory and was Nebo, Moab, Edom, and other regions. This explains how Moses could stand in Nebo and view the land of Canaan without entering it. Nebo, modern-day Nuba Mountains, are located further west of the Nile River. So Moses could stand here without violating the ban on entering Canaan, which started with the Nile River and stretched eastward towards the Red Sea. And further south of the Nile River was counted by the Hebrews as not being the Yam Suf, but another river, which is also mentioned in the Bible, and which we will cover in a future episode. The map continues with the third part, the southern part of the land of Israel. The word Zephon has an obscure meaning and has been interpreted to mean dark or unknown. In the Bible, this word is used to indicate a southern position on the biblical map. And in this verse, it describes the southern parts of the land of Israel. The Zephon borders begin with the Euphrates River in central Ethiopia and continue towards Mount Hor, which was located on the borders of Edom, meaning westward towards the Nile.
And the Lord spake unto Moses and Aaron in Mount Or, by the coast of the land of Edom.
The borders then continue further towards obscure and obsolete references, which seem to have been located somewhere in the southern quarters of west central Ethiopia. This marked the southern parts of the Holy Land. And the final part of the map, the eastern borders. Qadim, meaning forward or frontal. Although this word implies a northern position, the text clearly describes the eastern borders of the land. This agrees with the traditional interpretation of the word Qadam in the following verses to mean east. The borders continue east. They first pass by two obsolete cities before going out at a sea that is referred to in the text as the Sea of Kinneret, described in Joshua 13 as being located east.
And in the valley Beth Aram and Beth Nimrah, and Succoth and Zaphon, the rest of the kingdom of Sihon, king of Heshbon, Jordan and his border, even unto the edge of the sea of Chinnereth, on the other side Jordan eastward.
The word Kinneret means harp, and is meant to denote the shape of the Egyptian harp that the Hebrews were familiar with. This harp resembles the shape of the African horn, which has the same bend as an Egyptian harp. Sea of Kinneret is the Red Sea in the Horn of Africa. The borders go from central Ethiopia and straight east towards the Red Sea, going through modern-day Djibouti. This is what the text is trying to explain when it says that the borders touch the shoulders of the Red Sea. The authors use the imagery of the human body, where the shoulders are located roughly 3/4 northwest or northeast on the human body. On the inverted biblical map, the southeastern parts of the Red Sea would represent the northeastern part, and compared to the human body, this would represent the shoulders. A brilliant description of where the southeastern borders of the biblical land ended. After going a straight line towards the Red Sea, the borders then go straight up towards the opposite side of the Tekesse River. The borders then end at the Salt Sea, meaning the Danakil Desert. This was the Qadim, or the eastern borders of the land of Israel. These four regions represent the borders of the biblical land of Israel, beginning with the first cataract in Egypt and stretching all the way down to central Ethiopia, and then from the Nile westward and going out at the Red Sea. This is the region that is known in the Bible as the land of Israel, the home of the Israelite culture of ancient East Africa. The Bible tells us that this entire region was once controlled by one Israelite king, King Solomon, during the golden age of ancient Israel, and that Solomon ruled from central Ethiopia all the way to the borders of Egypt.
And at that time Solomon held a feast, and all Israel with him, a great congregation from the entering in of Hamath unto the river of Egypt, before the Lord our God 7 days, and 7 days, even 14 days.
Archaeology has somewhat confirmed that there was a monolithic culture that occupied this area before the establishment of the Demot culture, and that this monolithic culture later became unified and known as the Demot civilization. Monroe Hayes quotes this discovery in his book, Aksum, an African Civilization of Late Antiquity. With the recent studies showing that in the late 2nd or early 1st millennium BC, the eastern part of the Tigray Plateau was included in a widespread cultural complex on both the African and Arabian Tehama coasts of the Red Sea, in contact with the lowlands of Sudan, and perhaps with the Nile Valley, while the western part was in contact with the people of the Gash Delta. These two regions of the plateau later became unified culturally and politically under the Demot monarchy, meaning the biblical Israelite monarchy.